Welcome to Did I Do the Thing I Don't Want to Do? Honest Reflections on Unlearning. My name is Jenn Stucker. I'm an Associate Professor of Graphic Design, and with me is Heidi Nees, Assistant Professor in the Department of Theater and Film, and Katrina Heilmeier, a BGSU Life Design Coach. Before we begin, we want to frame our conversation by saying that when we were asked to participate in the Day of Dialogue as three white women who are on a journey to serve anti-racist work, each of us were humbled, honored, and honestly terrified. We acknowledge that we are uncomfortable in occupying a space of centering white people in this dialogue. However, we recognize this discomfort as part of the reflective process for engaging in this necessary work. We hope through sharing this conversation that it will function as a catalyst for continued dialogue that will extend far beyond this day.
Great. In terms of format today, we've devised a series of three questions. And so one of us will pose the question, and then we will follow through with discussion. So our first question stems from something we said in our description, which was, how do we critically recenter ourselves in order to decenter the narratives of white supremacy we've been told? And so in thinking about that, we wanted to discuss a little bit what awakened us, for lack of a better term, recognizing that term awakened, it's not a perfect term, but the first question is, what awakened you? And how do you sustain your engagement? In other words, what sustains you in this journey? So I'd like to just open that up to Katrina and Jenn.
Yeah. So, for me, I think that, first of all, like Jenn said, I think that I'm still learning to be comfortable using my voice. One of the things that I was in a book club, and one of the members said, maybe you're going to engage with someone and holding them accountable. And maybe that makes you feel uncomfortable for 15 or 20 seconds, maybe even an hour afterwards, but maybe that gives me my one moment of comfort throughout the day. And that was said by Siobhan. And that really stuck with me in terms of turning inward, which I was doing before, of critically examining myself and how do I start to feel more comfortable using my voice. So understanding while my uncomfort or discomfort might happen, it's so small and compared to the discomfort that so many others feel like on a daily basis. And I don't know if any of you have felt that as well, but that's something that that really kind of sticks with me. For me, it's my students. When I started getting into education and I was realizing that my lie of a narrative of being a white woman in America was not true for everyone, it kind of made me start examining the world around me. But I do feel like there's moments that have pushed me rather than inward to say, how can I start to use my voice? And how can I really start to critically engage in this work? And I think part of it is critically looking at yourself. And I think that, I don't know if you all feel this way, but engaging in this work makes me a better human and a better person. The way that I engage with this work helps me to examine my own mental health, what is around me, and how I, engage in boundaries and all of these other things that go outside of just this work too. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I can pinpoint a particular event. I think some of it is cultural, right? It's paying attention to the things around us. But I know years ago, in our program, we were trying to make an amplified effort to bring more diverse voices to our students. And I realized that I didn't really know enough of underrepresented voices. Was part of that challenge and my naivety. And then with that, one of our speakers had said something really profound and talked about, that all of our systems are designed. And so this is by Antoinette Carroll, so therefore they can be redesigned. And my profession is a designer. And so that has wrestled with me for a long time. I think that often we sit in a space that like victimology, not just you know, a white person. I think lots of us sit in that space. And so, you know, I endeavor to be on the side of the solution versus part of the problem. But to really understand the problem, I have to recognize like what my place is in that. Like, how do I contribute to it? How have I been part of it? It's not okay to go, okay, civil rights and affirmative action, and it's taking care of those things, and those are in the past. We have so many ideas and things to unbake in ourselves that have been passed down through traditions that we just may not be aware of. And the other part that I guess keeps me in the work and matters is thinking about my kids, knowing that they're going forward. And you know, Juneteenth, that we heard quite a bit about this summer. Thankfully, actually, my kids were, to be honest, pissed. And I was too, because I'm like, yeah, I didn't learn about that in high school, in other parts of my life, or Black Wall Street. And that was omitted from history. It wasn't that it, you know, it didn't exist. It just wasn't part of the conversation. And it infuriates me and it makes me mad. And I don't look at like blaming the teachers, again, not that victimology. I'm not going to be mad at my teachers. I know that, again, it's this part of this system. They were teaching the way they were taught, and so on and so forth. So now I have to look at my role as an educator and go, then this is the place that I sit with my positionality of being an educator, where I have to look at those stories and those missing pieces of history, and to do my best to bring those forward. And fully knowing that I'm not going to capture it all, but hopeful that people will embrace what I'm trying to do and go, hey, did you know about this and you know about that, and that I can be part of the solution and part of the culture shift that I believe is starting to happen. You know, this has very much been talked about, that this is a movement, and I fully believe in it being a movement, and it's time to move.
Yeah. And I think that especially all three of us, like we all host this power of being educators. So we all teach in different ways, and understanding that like that's a great sphere of influence that we can keep, that we have knowledge about, and we can keep sustaining the work too. My husband, I have a tendency to sprint real hard and then, you know, stop doing things. So like my craft shelf is full of like oh, that was your scrapbooking phase, and then this is your phase. And so he keeps reminding me like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so how can you sustain yourself upon the marathon too?
So Heidi, where are you with all of this?
Well, Jen, like you said, it's hard to pinpoint one moment, but I think about kind of phases of development. And something that was very impactful for me is when I graduated undergrad, I moved out to Los Angeles. And I should back up and say that I grew up in a small town in Ohio, predominantly white. And I went to a predominantly white institution as an undergrad. And then I moved out to Los Angeles, and I worked at the YMCA. And in doing that work, I worked with kids a lot. I actually taught a lot of swimming lessons. And so that experience of being in Los Angeles and immersing myself in a setting and an atmosphere that was very diverse, in some ways was very much, I talk about how that informal education was instrumental in my life, right? And then I think that, but I think even then I held on to these narratives that I had been taught as a kid, you know, narratives about work, like if you work hard, you can achieve anything. And that's the same for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Equality versus equity, right? But I wasn't aware of things like my privilege as a white woman. I wasn't aware of nuances and conversations about the difference between equity and equality, right? And these myths. And so I think I was still in some ways subscribing to those myths. And I think that a further stage of development is when I went to grad school and I started training as a theater historian. And Jen, like you were saying, looking at the past and seeing those holes and those gaps, and how voices have been marginalized, and wanting to address that in my own classrooms. And I think that it was around that time that I started doing a better job of listening to the people of color around me, and truly listening and being open to what they were saying, and those myths, those narratives that I had held on to started to crumble, right? That they weren't, yes, like you said, Jen, that I had been lied to, right? That those were not accurate. And so that listening, I think, is so important, and continuing to do that. I think that I'm still on the journey. I don't know kind of where I am on the journey exactly, but I know that that I continue need to do that work. And what sustains me in that, Jen, I sound like I'm stealing all of your answers.
You're fine.
But what sustains me in that is I would say my students and my children, and wanting to teach in a way that was different than how I was taught, for my students. And I actually have I have 2 sons, and I teach them in a different way that so that we do better, that they do better, that I do better.
And I think one thing that you mentioned is like these myths that we're unlearning, and how we can like go back in history and see where they came from. And I feel like it's like every day it's like, oh, that's another one. It's like being ready to constantly fail over and over, and kind of how can you keep getting back up. But then also once you uncover some of this, it's like you can't go back. Like there's no closing that book. So how do we like keep moving forward too? And I think that kind of applies into the question that I had, which I'd love to open a discussion about, is the idea, the title of this is, did I just do the thing I don't want to do? Which we've all been there. I'm there. I feel like I'm sitting in there a lot right now, as I am learning to be a better human and learning, like you said, Heidi, to listen more. And so for me, when I go into those spaces, it's very easy for me to get paralyzed. My background is like, I am a high achieving student that checks all the boxes and does the things I want to do. And that's not this work. And so when I make a mistake, I always find myself feeling this moment of paralysis, right? Of like, oh, maybe I should just not say anything. So how do you all fight that?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because because I'm actively working on this, I'm often putting my foot in my mouth. Not articulating it the right way. I'm fumbling. I obsessively overanalyze after I've said something that, like you said, did I say it the right way? Could I have said it better? How are they interpreting it? Maybe that's even amplified by some of the conversations I'm having with people are through this platform. Some of these conversations I'm having with people that I don't know very well. And so there's that space of trust, but then there's people that I'm having this conversation I know very well, and I'm trying to use my term earlier, unbake them, but not to the point that I'm an authority. I'm not a scholar on race. I'm not an expert on race, and so I'm trying to approach that from an angle of we have this trust space. So how can I, interlope into that? So I feel safety in that because, for certain positions, that person's my sibling or something. And so they kind of, by all accounts, are gonna hopefully forgive me. But then there's those other ones that are sort of high risk, or conversations with students that, could be high risk. And those are challenges, and that's probably where a lot of this resides, in this trust space. And so I'm asking people to trust my intentions when there's been a long history where our intentions have been clouded under ulterior motives. And so I have to recognize that my intentions are going to continue to be questioned because, are you really that way? Or are you, being performative? Or are you virtue signaling? Like, is this authentically you? And so I've obsessed about that. And at the end of the day, I have to just go, I can't control the way a person interprets it and means it. I can only hope that if they're still frustrated, if they're still annoyed, that they will come back and that we will just continue the dialogue and continue the conversation. But yeah, it frustrates me the most when closure and shutting down happens, and people just want to walk away from it. And I get it too. No one wants to be told they're wrong. I don't either. If I get a piece of criticism, I don't like it, and I get mad and I get annoyed, and anybody would. But if we're going to learn anything from it, we have to look and go, maybe there's a bit of truth to that, or maybe I didn't say it the right way, or maybe I didn't have the right knowledge. So yeah, I definitely feel like I'm walking on a lot of eggshells because this overanalysis part, and because I, maybe it's that story that I baked into myself of like, I'm a good person, and so everything I must do must be good, and I sit in a place of, and I know all of us are, there's the stories we tell others, and then there's the stories we tell ourselves. And for me, I want those things to be as congruent as possible. And so in the sense of framing this conversation and saying we are uncomfortable, that is to align the story I'm telling anyone that's listening to this conversation. I'm uncomfortable, and I'm acknowledging that discomfort, versus like, okay, let me tell you with this great confidence, when really inside the story I'm like, oh, this terrifies me. So I think we have to get to some honesty about those dualities that we have.
Yeah, so many things. One thought I have is that as scholars, we're trained to defend, right? To argue and defend our points. And I think it's really something that I try to remind myself, is that this is not the space for that, right? That if I say something, if I screw up, right? If I say something that ends up offending somebody, or lots of somebody's, I need to listen to that. And what I'm talking about specifically here is cross-racially. If I, as a white woman, say something or do something that is offensive to BIPOC, I communities and individuals, I need to not be defensive, right? I need to just listen and reflect. And if I have those moments where I'm not sure, right, that maybe I just screwed up how I talked about that. I am fortunate that I have some colleagues here, and I have a couple of other colleagues that I feel like I can go to and have honest conversations and say, this is what happened. This is how I handled it. What do you think? And I know that those people will hold me accountable, right? And will say, and might say, yeah, you kind of screwed that up. And here are some maybe other ways you could have handled that. And so I think that is very important too, to have those people, that community that will keep you accountable, and to do the work to continuously reflect and keep yourself in check, so that hopefully if that situation arises again, you can do better. I will also say that for me, that gets very tricky in terms of who I'm going to, because I want to. I think that again, listening to BIPOC voices is key, right? By the same token, I don't want to constantly be running to colleagues and friends who are people of color and saying, hey, I did this thing, what do you think?
Yeah.
Recognizing that is, I'm asking for emotional, mental labor on behalf of that person. I'm asking for their time, and I'm adding to everyday race-based stresses that they already endure. And so so there's a balance there that that I think I'm still not certain of, but that that I think is important to continue working through.
Yeah. And also recognizing, like, if someone holds you accountable, especially a person of color, like how much work that took for them. Like, it is not easy. I guess a person of color, it's not easy, but it's also not easy for like anyone to hold you accountable, but especially for people of color. And so being willing to, like you said, like Heidi, so much of it is like listening and knowing when are the moments that I need to look inside myself to see what's wrong, and when are the moments that it's not about me, and like when are the moments that I need to decenter myself. And so, you know, as a life design coach, I've been doing a ton of work with design thinking really just over the past year, but a big part of it is, how am I trying something, seeing how it fits, being willing to fail, being willing to get back up again, being willing to try again. And Brene Brown said this quote of like, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. And knowing that in the process of getting it right, I have to be willing to like humble myself many times over, and knowing that like there are times where it's going to feel like this paralysis of like, what did I just do? And do I even have any responsibility? Like, not any responsibility, because I do think we all have responsibility, but like, do I have a place to even be saying anything? And then saying like, oh, wait, that's you centering yourself in this experience. And so many times the things that I catch myself feeling paralysis about are like little tiny details, and I have to remind myself like, that's not what is important. You know, what's important is what is the bigger issue that we're talking about. And so, you know, you're really freaked out that you used the wrong word and someone held you accountable. Like, how can you reframe that and look at it in terms of how can I really not focus on using a different word, but seeing like, what is it in me that reacted that way? And like, how am I still fighting my own fragility and my specifically like my white fragility when I'm reacting in a certain way, even if I don't react externally, like what's going on inside my body, and how can I process that through so I can be more resilient and be more interested in like being eager to grow rather than afraid to fail. And it's so much easier said than done, right? But yeah, I think that those are some of the things that help get me back up, is analyzing it internally and then seeing like, how can I look at the bigger picture too?
Yeah, I just want to comment or piggyback to, you said using the wrong word or term. And I guess I want to make sure that in the context of this conversation, my interpretation, and so this is me interpreting what you're saying, I'm assuming, because this is how it would be for me, the wrong terms, when I would hope or don't think we're talking about these blatant racist terms, but it's more those subtle things of, I've disclosed to both of you, I don't like the term woke, I have challenge with. I like the metaphor and what it represents, but my own internal dialogue is, I don't, you know, I just don't like that I woke up late to the conversation, or that if I say I'm woke, all of a sudden I know everything, and, you know, I have nothing more to learn. And I feel that term, you know, gets pushed out into space. And so, so that's when I might like hold someone else accountable to using that word. But then, other terms might be like someone referring to, back through history as that person was a slave rather than being enslaved. Those are terms that are very distinctive as far as identity, and that's not something that I learned until recently. And so for years, I would use the predominant term of slave because that's, how it was identified rather than enslaved people. And that's a big distinction. And that's something that, I have to, if someone says it, just kind of unpack it a little bit, but not admonish, like, righteous indignation. I've been using that term lately, but that's why I guess I want to get back to that when you're saying those words, right? It's
yes, I'm so glad that you pointed that out.
Yeah,
like the word,
words. Yeah.
Yeah, the word I was thinking was ally. And so like of the term of like me calling myself an ally, like how does that sit wrong with me, when I am like told that like sometimes ally is a dangerous word. And I was like, okay, you're right. Like, just because someone called me an ally doesn't mean I'm an ally to everyone in every sense. And it doesn't mean that I'm done working. But I'm so happy that you brought that up, Jen.
I also think adding to that, I think about, we have colloquial phrases in our culture that have very racist, misogynistic roots that oftentimes we don't realize, right? So I think that those can sometimes be be missteps. I also think about how we navigate conversations, whether that's not conversations with our family and friends, with colleagues. I think about classroom conversations as well. And, if somebody says something within that space, within that conversation, that that results in an impact that is hurtful to others, right? Or if somebody says something that is a microaggression, or, well, there's another term, right? That is an aggression, right?
Yeah.
That knowing how to respond in the moment can be difficult. And I will say that there have been times that I left a conversation, and sometimes it's been classroom discussions. I've left and thought, I think there were better ways I could have handled that, right? And so I think that those types of things are also the type of missteps we're talking about, right? That it's important to really assess, what maybe was productive in those moments and what we could have done better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also understanding that like all of this is a privilege, right? to like even the think about like, oh, I feel uncomfortable, is knowing that like as a white woman, I have the ability to step away from this without very many repercussions in my life. And so like continuing to be like, I say a couple of things to myself, kind of almost like chants, and I'm here to get it right, not be right, is one. But also like check your privilege is one that I kind of internally say to myself too, is like when I get too down a hole, to be like, check your privilege, Katrina. Like this isn't about you. This is bigger than you. And this is too important to not get back up. Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask about how you approach your work authentically and sincerely. So we've talked a little bit more about that, but I know I mentioned like virtue signaling, for example. So how do you, how do you sincerely and authentically engage in those?
Yeah, I think it's so easy, especially when we look at like social media or different threads for people to talk at people. And this right here, like, how can we create more of these communities where we feel comfortable showing up as our full selves, to kind of like really be be challenged, be held accountable, so that we can keep like going out and doing it in a way where we're being wholehearted, in a way where we're not being defensive of one way or another. Because I find myself of like, when I get on the defensive of like, this is the wrong term, or did you know that this person is actually problematic? Then I find myself becoming more defensive and becoming more like, I have to make sure I don't say anything else that other people could pick apart. Whereas the intention is not to pick it apart. The intention is to get better as people and keep working to make progress. So I try to guard myself against the picking for picking's sake, because I think that it's easy in today's society to be like, okay, so what is my instinct to pick? Is it also because I am, you know, stuck in the house or just going to work? And is it because of like the other things that I'm feeling, that things aren't out of control, but what I can control is telling this one person that this one word was wrong? And how do I do that? And how do I show up authentically to make it a dialogue versus me telling you that you're wrong? I feel like that kind of went off the rails, but that's kind of like, I try to do that with almost everything I do. And now it's just like, how do I bring it to this work? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, this idea of not just talking at each other, right? But authentically engaging in dialogue. And that dialogue is going to be uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. But getting at that deeper level. And I think that, again, going back to active listening, right? That is really active, and deep listening is really important. I also think that we've discussed this, that owning that you are not an expert, right? There's that and coming into the conversation, being honest about that we are not authorities, we are not experts, and that we make mistakes. And that is not to excuse mistakes, but to recognize that we need to continually persist at working on ourselves, on our perspectives, on the way that we engage in the work. I also Jenn, this question about authenticity. I mean, authenticity is such a slippery term anyway, right? Like, yeah. And maybe it's, as a theater and performance studies scholar, I am very prone to over analyzing. But I struggle a lot, and I have for the last couple of months, with for lack of a better term, the kind of performativity, especially on social media, right? And this term that you've just used, virtue signaling, and questioning in myself, like, what is my intent in posting this, and what do I think the impact might be? How will others understand it or read it? Am I posting enough? Am I not posting enough? If I'm not posting enough, is that silence, and is that complicity? I don't know. And I have to be 100% honest. I've never been like a huge presence on social media, but I actually a couple months ago quit the only social media I was on, which is Facebook. And I did that partly for my own mental health. I thought I really needed to do that. And I decided that I thought that redirecting that energy was the approach I needed to take. And so I have to be honest, I don't miss it. But I do think that this is, I think that struggle, I don't have any answers, except to say that I share in that struggle of trying to find the authentic place and being sincere in the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now it's my turn to sort of piggyback on you a little bit, but I do think that the listening is the quintessential part, especially also acknowledging our naivety or lack of experience, but that when we are asking questions to anyone, that we don't already like have surmised what we think is going to be said or what we think the answer is. That I genuinely asked it because I genuinely don't understand it, or I'm not sure. I want to figure this out. And so I think, if we're coming at a place of like, I just want to be validated, it's just a waste of time. And so I feel like I ask a lot of, what I would call probably dumb questions to many people. But it's for that. Like you said, I'm trying to really listen, try not to have an answer right away. Sometimes I do. I'm not obviously perfect by any means. Sometimes I've made my judgment, but then I'm like, have to even recognize that in the moment that I'm like, I kind of stopped listening for a second. I started forming my answer, and I have to back up. And that work in progress, I think, is something that we've all talked about. I want to also just piggyback to the social media aspect, because I've never been on Facebook. It's never been my vehicle. But Instagram is probably primary, and Twitter, like I have 5 followers probably or something, so it's not my main vehicle. But Instagram, I wrestled a lot with that space and that place of putting content there. Blacking out my screen in June, and is that performative? And I think that's where there's part of me that accepts the performative, so long as you are not just being performative. It's not just when you're being watched that you're doing that work, basically daily. I'm definitely at the space where this is my daily work. There isn't a conversation, or some point. It's not, it's not all encompassing of like, I'm not sure what I'm going to eat that day, but it is an active daily conversation that I have. And so there, if you look at my Instagram, there's going to be posts, that I just shared with you how I went to, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And I wanted to put those images on there, not because like, hey, look at me, I went to this memorial, but one, it was a palpable moving space, but two, I know my primary, followers are similar skin tone to mine, and I want them to see that information and hopefully make that trip and go to that space and get some of that knowledge. And so part of, that performative is the transmission, of the message. And so it has, I guess the performative has to be backed up with the authenticity of like, yeah, are you, the stories we're telling others and the stories we're telling ourselves that I mentioned earlier is like, if I'm telling you the story, I'm also, very much working on that story. But I do look back at my Instagram and the history, right? And there's a very clear point of view. See family for sure. But is it, white majoritarian narrative? Absolutely. Can I work more to pay attention more to others? Obviously Instagram is self-serving primarily anyway, but this is something I am doing for the self. And so this is something I'm going to, be sharing with others. And that day might be, this post, and it might be a social engagement day. And the next day it might be something about my family. And I don't have a space where I'm trying to cultivate this one thing. I'm just, I guess, being back to my authentic self. This is what I'm trying to work on. This is the things I'm trying to do. I have many holes and missing pieces, and I'm going to try to continue to fill those spaces.
And I think that's a great, I think that's a great point. That, all work, any work is performative, right? So it's not, so it's about going past just doing something for kind of a surface level performance sake, but for actually engaging it, backing that up with engaging in the work. I think that's a really good point. I just wanted to reiterate.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of your perspectives in this. And as we're kind of like working and fumbling through this, I appreciate having other people like you as well to really learn from in my journey. And I think I love the podcast Still Processing, and Jenna Wortham said, stop telling me that my life matters and do something about it. And so I think that we're also feeling this too, is that this internal reflection is an important first step. And I feel like, tying it back to design thinking again, it's like we always have to keep coming back to this step, but it really can't be the only step. And it feels performative when you're just telling other people versus how are you actually engaging in the messy work of trying to do better. And I think that as this group, we really want to set up a space so that people can continue to have these types of discussions, and then also see how can we make changes, whether it's in our own lives, at the university. And so we'll be setting up 4 different conversations. And I will put at the bottom here my email so that you can email me and join. Their Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And we'll be having different topics every time, but we want to invite others in to be, how can we show up authentically, humbly, and have these discussions that help push us forward and help make us push us forward also in the way of like in actions, and what are we doing and how are we using this knowledge that we're gaining too. We're really looking forward to these discussions, and I really appreciate both of you kind of taking the time to, chat a little bit, and like you said, have an authentic dialogue versus, telling opinions one way or the other. I really appreciate that.
And I just want to piggyback that this conversation doesn't have to just be 3 white women,
Yes.
or 5 white women or 6 white women or so on and so forth. We have to start creating spaces where we can have these conversations. So I hope that you will join us. Email Katrina. We would love to, our campus climate and culture is the responsibility of the people, and that it requires us to have these conversations.
Yeah, we can't just say that we have a great Office of Diversity and Belonging and then check the box. Like, it's up to all of us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was just gonna, Jen, say these discussions are open to everyone and anyone. So please come. And Katrina, I think that you make a really good point, right? That it's we're part of a community, and it's shared responsibility to do this work, so that we can all learn and grow together.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you on Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.